in today's lesson, we will be discussing the principles of clarity. The principles of clarity are useful guides to help your writing come across clearly to your reader. Okay, so before we get into how you can improve your writing, it's helpful to see some examples of unclear writing. There is a belief among some researchers that consumers' choices in fast food restaurants are healthier because there are postings of nutrition information in menus. So, what's going on in this first sentence? Upon first reading, it's kind of unclear who is posting nutritional information or the fact that they're referring to customers and not the researchers. If we read it a second or a third time, we can understand the information this sentence is trying to relay, but it should be clear upon the first reading. Okay, now let's look at the second one. Because the student's preparation for the exam was thorough, none of the questions on it were a surprise. Again, we can kind of understand what the sentence is saying, and more so if we read it a second time, but it's still a little confusing. Okay, so lastly, the design of the new roller coaster was more of a struggle for the engineers than had been their expectation. So this one just feels all jumbled up, and it just feels overly wordy. Okay, now that we've seen the examples of unclear writing, we can compare it to what we're aiming for, which is clear writing that is easily understood on the first reading. Some researchers believe that consumers are choosing healthier food because fast food restaurants are posting nutrition information in their menus. Because the student prepared thoroughly for the exam, she was not surprised by any of the questions on it. The engineers struggled more than they expected when designing the new roller coaster. So, don't these feel so much easier to read? They just flow better. But what is the difference? What makes these clearer? The information in the sentences hasn't changed, but somehow they're just easier to understand. Well, these sentences employ the principles of clarity. There are two principles of clarity that we will be discussing today. Okay. The first principle of clarity is to make the main characters of a sentence the subject of that sentence. As a little refresher, a subject of a sentence is the noun or pronoun who or that is doing the verb or the action. In comparison, the object of the sentence is the noun or pronoun that is receiving the action of the verb. So, to keep your sentences both clear and concise, make the person or the thing or the idea doing the action your subject. For example, look at these two sentences. A walk was had by Anne. In this sentence, a walk is our subject. Is walk really the main character of this sentence? No, Anne is. Now look at the clearer alternative. Anne took a walk. Anne is now working as both our main character and our subject. As an added benefit, our sentence is now shorter because we've eliminated unnecessary verbs, a concept we'll touch on more when we get to the second principle. So, now that we've been introduced to the first principle, let's practice applying it. Identify the subject and main character in the following sentences and indicate which sentence is clearer. Number 1. There is opposition among many voters to nuclear power plants based on a belief in their threat to human health. Or number 2. Many voters oppose nuclear power plants because they believe that such plants threaten human health. So, which one of these is clearer? Pause the video and write down the number in your notes and identify which is the subject and which is the main character. They should be one and the same if the sentence is clear. I will reveal the answer in a few slides. Okay, let's do a couple more. Remember, we're identifying the subject and the main character and deciding which sentence is clearer. Number 3. Growth in the market for electronic books is driven by the frequent preference among customers for their convenience and portability. Or is it number 4? The market for electronic books has grown because customers frequently prefer their convenience and portability. Go ahead and pause the video and write down your answers in the notes. In the next slide, I will reveal the answers to both the previous slide and to this slide. Okay, did you answer the questions in your notes? Go ahead and do that if you haven't. You're only cheating yourself if you don't practice. Okay, so our clear sentences were number 2 and number 4, but we're going to go over all of them. In sentence 1, our subject is opposition, but our main character is voters. This one is a little tricky, so you might have thought that there was the subject of the sentence, but the word there can never work as a subject. Instead, if a sentence starts with the word there, then the subject of the sentence is after the verb instead of before it like it usually is. In number 2, our subject and our main character is voters, and that's how we know it is a clear sentence, because again, they're one and the same. In number 3, our subject is growth and our main character is market. In this case, our main character is working as the object of a prepositional phrase. And lastly, in number 4, both our subject and main character is the market. So, how'd you do? Did you get as many right as you thought you would? Now that you know the first principle of clarity, see if you can apply it to your own writing. Grab a paper that you've written for another class and see if you can spot any errors associated with this guideline. Looking at your own writing, are the main characters and subjects of your sentence the same? If not, make it so they are. Make sure that you are not writing in the passive voice. The passive voice is where the main character is working as the object instead of the subject. A good clue for this is the word by right before your main character. A good indicator of a clear sentence is your main character being as close to the beginning of the sentence as possible. If it's somewhere in the middle or near the end, then it's probably not working as your subject, and most likely it's working as a object, and therefore you're writing in the passive voice, which is what you really want to avoid at all costs. Okay, now let's move on to the second principle of clarity. Make important actions into verbs. Just like with the first principle, where we made sure our subjects and main characters are one and the same, the second principle is doing the same thing just with verbs. The main action that a character is doing should be the main verb in the sentence. We want to stick with strong, action-oriented words as our verb. So think like run, jump, think, do. They're actions. Something is occurring. Avoid nominalizations of important actions. Nominalization is a verb that has been transformed into a noun. When you nominalize your main action, then the verb in your sentence is going to be a weak linking verb like be. So you might not be familiar with the concept of nominalization. So let's practice distinguishing between nominalizations of adjectives and verbs. Pause the video and do this activity in your notes. Identify the part of speech. So is it a noun? Is it a verb? Then take the word and convert it to the opposite. So if it's a noun, turn it into a verb. Keep in mind that some of these words work as both a verb or a noun. So go ahead, pause the video, and work on this practice. Did you finish the exercise in the last slide? If not, rewind this video and go back to it. This practice is going to help you become a stronger writer. Let's go over the answers now. Analysis is a noun, and if we've converted to a verb, it would be to analyze. Suggest is a verb. As a noun, it would be suggestion. Expression is a noun. To express is the verb equivalent. Decrease is one of those words where it can be both a noun or a verb depending on how you use it. For example, Fred decreased his spending habit. In that, decrease is our verb. Versus, a decrease in spending is a good habit to have. In that case, it is working as a noun. Emphasize is the verb. Emphasis is the noun equivalent. Believe is a verb. To convert it to a noun, it would be belief. Lastly, we have another 2 for 1. Approach works as both a verb and a noun. He approached the man. In that case, it's working as our verb. Versus, the approach was done by the man. In that case, it's working as a noun. So, how'd you do? Did you get all of them right? If you feel like you want some more practice, you can also take these words and put them into sentences, just like I did with decrease and approach. Look at the difference. You'll probably notice that the nominalizations should end up being a little longer. Just like we talked about how you can apply the first principle of clarity to your own writing, you can also do that with the second principle. grab the same paper you were looking at before and go through it and identify the verb and the main action. Are they the same? If the answer is no, try to fix that. If you're noticing that the verbs you do have are weak verbs such as different tenses of be, ask yourself, are they necessary? Is there a shorter, clearer way to say the same sentiment? With that in mind, don't completely remove all be verbs. Sometimes they are accurate. You just have to use your judgment. With this, again, see if your main action is working as something else, like as a noun. Lastly, look for nominalizations. Try to convert them back into verbs. This will kill two birds with one stone. This will make your actions into your verb, and it will get rid of those weak be verbs. It's not enough to use one principle or the other. You need to employ both in order to achieve maximum clarity. More times than not, if a sentence is unclear, it is most likely breaking both of these rules anyways. An added benefit of these principles is that if applied correctly, your writing will also be shorter and more concise. This will give you more room in your papers to create stronger arguments. A lot of times, students fall back on this unclear writing to pad their paper to reach a page or word count minimum. Don't fall into this trap. Do your research and come up with a strong thesis for your paper, and you won't have a problem reaching those page minimums. Lastly, remember to use these principles of clarity in conjunction with proper grammar and punctuation. The main thing that leads to a sloppy, unclear paper is bad grammar and punctuation.